The Senate chamber was thick with tension, the kind of atmosphere where even the shuffle of papers echoed like thunder. It had started as a routine policy debate, but everyone knew that when J.D. Vance and Lindsey Graham ended up in the same room, sparks were almost inevitable. Both men were known for their sharp tongues and political stubbornness, but this time, the confrontation took an unexpected turn that left the chamber buzzing for hours afterward. It began when Graham, frustrated by Vance's refusal to support a measure he had been championing, snapped in a way that revealed more emotion than strategy. His voice rose above the murmurs of the chamber as he called out, "You're being a jerk, J.D. A complete jerk." The word hung in the air longer than it should have, partly because senators rarely hurled personal insults so blatantly in the middle of a session. A few aides glanced at each other, whispering under their breath, while reporters in the gallery instinctively leaned forward, sensing that something big was about to unfold. Vance, however, didn't flinch. He didn't frown, raise his voice, or appear offended. Instead, he leaned back slightly, resting one arm on his chair as though he had been expecting this moment all along. A half-smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, not of arrogance, but of someone who understood the power of patience in a heated exchange. For several seconds, he said nothing, letting Graham's words echo and fade. That silence itself was powerful. It made people uncomfortable, shifting the attention of the entire chamber onto him. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, measured, and unshaken. "You know, Senator," Vance said, his voice carrying with an effortless clarity, "if standing up for people who are tired of politics as usual makes me a jerk in your book, then I'll wear that title proudly. But maybe the real problem here isn't me, it's the fact that Washington has gotten so comfortable with its own failures that it mistakes conviction for arrogance." The sentence landed like a hammer. Reporters' pens scribbled furiously. Some senators stiffened, realizing that Vance had just turned Graham's insult into a weapon against the entire establishment. Others looked down at their desks, quietly acknowledging the sting of his words. Graham, visibly unsettled, tried to interject, but the moment was already slipping from his grasp. Vance's one sentence had shifted the narrative from a personal jab to a statement about principle, and the weight of it was too sharp to ignore. The chamber fell silent again, not the awkward silence of insult, but the heavy quiet of realization. In that instant, Vance had done something few politicians managed to achieve in such a setting. He had redefined the terms of the argument with a single response. Instead of appearing defensive, he came across as unshakably confident, rooted in his beliefs, and unwilling to be rattled by a label. Even those who disagreed with him politically had to admit that the delivery was masterful. The young senator from Ohio had turned what could have been a humiliating moment into one that showcased his poise under pressure. Outside the chamber, social media was already ablaze with clips of the exchange, with hashtags spreading faster than press releases. What made the moment even more striking was the contrast: Graham's emotional outburst versus Vance's calm, calculated reply. One had acted out of frustration, the other out of deliberate control. And in politics, perception is everything. By the time the chamber returned to its usual proceedings, it was clear who had gained the upper hand. Graham's insult was already being forgotten, replaced by Vance's piercing sentence that would replay across news cycles for days. As the chamber settled back into its rhythm, the ripple effect of Vance's words continued to spread beyond those four walls. Reporters rushed out of the gallery, phones buzzing, tweets flying, and within minutes the clip was breaking into news cycles across multiple networks. What had begun as an insult between two senators had now become the headline of the day. Back in the Senate, Lindsey Graham attempted to regain footing, but every effort sounded defensive. His usual sharpness was dulled by the fact that he had been the one to throw the first punch, and Vance had been the one to turn it into a defining moment. Several colleagues on both sides of the aisle exchanged quiet glances, as if silently acknowledging that Graham had miscalculated. Vance, on the other hand, didn't press further. He didn't gloat, didn't escalate, and didn't seek to humiliate. He simply returned to the policy debate, his composure intact. That restraint only amplified the perception that he had handled the situation like a seasoned leader rather than a rookie senator. Outside the chamber, the reactions were mixed but overwhelmingly intense. Supporters of Vance praised him for standing firm, calling his response a breath of fresh air in a political climate where insults often devolved into shouting matches. "That's how you handle an attack, with calm strength," one commentator noted on a primetime panel. Another went further, saying, "This was J.D. Vance's moment. He showed the country he won't be pushed around by the establishment, even by someone like Graham." Meanwhile, Graham's allies tried to downplay the exchange, framing it as a heat-of-the-moment misunderstanding. But the narrative had already slipped away from them. Every time the clip played, it highlighted Graham's frustration and Vance's poise side by side, making the contrast impossible to spin. By evening, the story had gone viral. Memes popped up, turning Vance's line into slogans. Hashtags like #NotAJerk and #conviction over comfort trended across platforms, with supporters using them to echo his sentiment that Washington's complacency was the real enemy. Even late-night shows picked up the clip, some mocking Graham's outburst, others applauding Vance's cool-headed reply. Political strategists noted something deeper. "Moments like this stick," one analyst explained during a panel discussion. "It's not just about the insult, it's about how Vance handled it. He turned a negative into a positive, and in doing so, he showed a kind of political maturity that resonates with voters who are tired of drama." The next morning, newspapers across the country carried variations of the same story. Graham calls Vance a jerk, Vance turns it into a rallying cry. For Graham, it was a minor but very public stumble. For Vance, it was a chance to solidify his reputation as a rising figure who could face down seasoned political veterans without blinking. In Ohio, calls flooded into Vance's office. Constituents left messages praising him for standing his ground. One caller summed up the mood perfectly: "You didn't just defend yourself, you defended all of us who feel ignored by this town." Behind the scenes, some senators privately admitted that they had underestimated Vance. His willingness to confront the establishment, paired with his ability to do so without losing control, made him a force to be reckoned with. He was no longer just the freshman senator from Ohio, he was becoming a national figure in his own right. For Lindsey Graham, the exchange lingered longer than he would have liked. Though his career was far from over, the image of him losing composure while Vance remained calm had already etched itself into the public memory. It wasn't a career-ending moment, but it was a bruising reminder of how quickly power dynamics can shift in the political arena. By the week's end, it was clear that the phrase, "jerk," had backfired spectacularly. Instead of damaging Vance, it had elevated him. His one sentence, delivered with calm conviction, had turned an insult into a defining moment that reshaped the conversation, not just about him, but about what kind of leadership people wanted to see in Washington. And as the story began to fade from headlines, one truth remained: Lindsey Graham had given J.D. Vance the perfect opening to prove himself, and Vance had seized it with precision. Sometimes, in politics, all it takes is one sentence to change everything.